of Chat with the Chief. I am Chief Kathy McAlpine, Tigard Police Department. This is our second virtual chat, and we received a lot of positive feedback after our first one, so we're excited to come back to you and do it again. The priority, of course, is, if you're aware, is there is a public safety levy ask out there with ballots being turned in by May 19th. And so what I've tried to do over the last year is to answer any questions people may have regarding our police staffing issues, clarify any questions. So I would encourage viewers, you can submit your questions now into the chat box as we take you through this long hour interaction. Also, any other questions you may have as it relates to the pandemic and how we are conducting police services during this time. What trends have we seen, and how are we trying to stay connected to the community? So again, if you have questions, please feel free to do it, and I will stop my dialogue and focus on those questions. One of the things that I like to try and share with the community is kind of the statistics of what we're facing. So I have been here 3 years now, and for the last 2.5 years, it seems I have been talking about our staffing issues, in particular patrol, or what we refer to as primary call receivers. As we all know, Washington County has grown over 12% from 2010 to 2018, but the Tigard community has actually grown faster, 13.5%. Well, during that same time, our calls for service have doubled that of the growth population, with well over 27%. Yet our staffing has actually gone backwards and a decrease of 4%. So that gives you a little bit of context of kind of where we're at today on our staffing versus the population and the demands that our officers are faced with. Given that, the other thing I'd like to share with you, what does that look like? You know, Tigard is a relatively safe community. If you look at our crime statistics, they've stayed relatively same over the last, let's say, 5 years. However, those calls for service have increased over, 1,200 over from one year to another, and that's usually in the societal type calls. They don't necessarily equate to a increase in persons, crime, or property, but more of a calls for service, whether you're dealing with people in crisis, our transient population, or public disturbances. Those are primarily what are driving our calls for service. People are concerned about what they see, and as first responders, we're the ones that are asked to assess the situation and try and render some aid to the person who is in some sort of crisis. Some of the other things that are driving that is, again, to try and put it in perspective, a lot of times we talk about our response times, and especially when you talk about priority 1 and 2s, which are your imminent or immediate life safety issues. And over this same 5 years, our priority response times have actually increased every year. And so it's taken us longer, whether it's geographically trying to respond through the congestion or that we're dispersed farther and farther apart. Also during that same time, as it's climbing on a response time, the number of priority 1 and 2, so again, those are immediate life safety issues, they have grown especially over the last 2 years. 2017, we were just under 4,000 priority 1 calls, and 2018, we were at 41, almost 4,200, and 2019, we closed out with 4,400 priority 1 and 2 calls. And that means everybody drops what they're doing, everybody responds to make sure that we stabilize the situation and render the aid that we need. And again, that could be somebody who's in a mental health crisis, a CPR call, because sometimes we can get there faster than the fire department because we don't have the big rigs that they have to do. And it could also be something in progress. Again, that could be a burglary, somebody's trying to break in or is in your house, those are all considered priority 1 and 2 calls. Thank you, Ashley, for that. I get a great chance to see the comments, and she's thanking us and having a great day, so we appreciate that. And that comes to mind is, before I get into our staffing and the needs, is during this pandemic, I just want to take an opportunity to thank the community for their unwavering support for the police department. We have received a lot of positive comments, some donations when it comes to hand sanitizers and personal protective equipment from some of our local businesses. So just want to thank everybody on behalf of all the men and women of the Tigard Police Department. Thank you for your support and thank you for your generosity. I appreciate that. Again, when we talk about the other thing, it's hard to show when I don't have a map, but if you look at Tigard, we're constructed in 5 districts. And oftentimes we are staffed with minimum staffing. And that is 3 officers on day shift, 4 officers on swing shift, and then 3 officers on graveyard, with the exception of Friday and Saturdays, we have 4. And so we are not covering all our districts, and again, that will increase our response time. And so what I'm trying to do is increase the number of officers out in patrol so that we can all stay in our districts and intuitively have a smaller footprint, quicker response time, and the officer gets to know all the nuances of a district. Any problem issues, quality of life, get to know the businesses, and again, conduct that proactive policing and building community trust and relationships. I did get a question, so I'm going to kind of shift gears again, and I'll do that throughout this hour-long presentation. Is when questions come up, that's going to be my priority, because I want to be here to answer your questions. So the question is, what kind of crime trends are we seeing with the COVID outbreak? And I will tell you, the first couple of weeks, it was pretty quiet. Everybody was adhering to the governor's stay-at-home order. Obviously, our businesses were closing, and there wasn't a lot of traffic out there. Actually, even minimal foot traffic. Since that time, what we have noticed is our calls for service has increased again, and in particular, we have seen an increase in burglaries. In particular, our commercial burglaries. Mid-April, if you compare it to April of 2019, we were up 60%. Also concerning, and it's kind of odd when I say concerning when it's actually a reduction, but we've seen a 200% reduction in our DHS referrals. And a lot of time those referrals come from our mandatory reporters, such as our teachers. And so when our kids are in school, they get to know their students, they get to know their concerns, and we get to check on the welfare of kids. With all this stay-at-home order, we've seen a 200% decrease in those referrals. And that doesn't mean that those concerns have stopped. They're just behind closed doors, and we're challenged by knowing about that and able to respond and do welfare checks. We are seeing an increase now in domestic disturbances, public disturbances. So again, whether that's individuals just getting a little agitated, tired of being sequestered, short fuses, being isolated too long, but we are seeing an increase in those types of calls. Overall thefts have gone down, but again, I attribute a lot of that to a lot of our businesses that normally have loss prevention are not they're not open, loss prevention isn't working, and so we're not seeing those calls for service. And we're seeing an increase in our mental health calls, individuals in crisis, again, whether that's through mental health or some sort of addiction. And we have been responding probably more so in public areas, on your streets, in sidewalks, because a lot of the resources they were using during the daytime, they're no longer able to access during this closure or shutdown. So we are seeing a little bit of a spike in that. So, and you may have noticed how we are trying to provide services. Equally as concerned that you are of exposure, we want to make sure that our officers are safe, that they aren't exposed to any unknown this COVID virus, and nor do we want to transmit when we come to your residence. So as many times as we can, you may get a call from us and seeing if we can handle it over the phone. If not, at least trying to ascertain if anybody is sick at the home, any high fevers. We would ask that the caller maybe step out of their house if the weather allows for it, and not worried about any disabilities that wouldn't allow you to come out and talk to us, but then in that open air and having a conversation. So we were trying to do that. And again, thank you everybody for your support, because I think everybody's been understanding and tolerant of that new service level right now. We're not proactively trying to displace our homeless population. Again, trying to keep them sheltered in the place that they're used to, and trying to also get the resources that they need should we encounter anybody that is in need. So another question is, what will the levy be used for, and what happens if it doesn't pass? The levy ask is a public safety only levy, and should it pass, it would allow us to hire 8 additional officers to support patrol. And again, that's to increase our minimum staffings levels up, and a broader coverage of the entire city footprint. Again, we want to build community relationships. We want to get there faster, and so our response times. It would also add 1 additional school resource officer. For those longtime Tigard residents, you know that you've had 4 school resource officers for many years, and a year ago, under the budget cuts, we reduced 4 to 2 and reassigned them back to patrol. And so for this last year, we've been operating on 2 school resource officers, one assigned to the high school, the other one tasked with going to both of the middle schools. By adding a 3rd SRO, then we would have 2 SROs that would focus on the middle school and a dedicated time, and then also be there for the elementary feeder schools that feed into their respective middle school. It also provides us the opportunity to do advanced training in de-escalation and crisis intervention. Again, that is some phenomenal training that at this rate we have only been able to get anywhere from 2 to 3 officers in a year, and this additional funding would allow us to onboard more officers with this advanced training a lot faster. And then of course the subsequent support staff that would go in helping the officers do their job, such as a property and evidence and also a record staff to deal with the increased call load. So what happens if it doesn't pass? There's been no perceived threats. There's no identified if it doesn't, we're taking away X, Y, and Z. What I'm challenged with is, how do I continue to give the level of service that you want, that you need, and to keep our community safe? So it may require me to make some hard decisions on bringing back our motor officers, or again, eliminating or bringing back further our school resource officers, because the priority is the ability to handle 911 calls, and if we feel like we're adequately staffed to do that. So there is no identified, I'm going to cut X, Y, and Z. I've also heard from the council that they understand this is a problem that needs to be fixed, and they will work to identify other ways that we might be able to address this problem. So stand by, and hopefully, it resolves through the levy, but if not, then we'll work on this another way. So David had asked, how does Tigard staffing compare to that of Beaverton, Tualatin, King City, and the Sheriff's Office in the areas just outside Tigard? Great question, David. I appreciate that. First, though, I'm going to go outside of Washington County. Our comparables, when you talk about population size, our first 2 comparables are Corvallis and Albany. They have the same amount of population, and I look at their calls for service. Both of those cities have had to do a public safety levy or fee because they too could not, through their general fund, sustain the number of officers they need to safely do their job in those cities. So again, as comparables for population-wise, they're about the same. One of the other comparisons, if you look at Tualatin, which is about half the size in population, our minimum staffing numbers are the same. So half the size, half the double the calls for service, and same amount of staffing. Beaverton, King City is, I think, 1-2 officers at a time. They look to us in Tualatin and the other cities when a major call comes to use those regional support to help them out. So I would not use King City. And the sheriff's office, again, they're larger footprint, and so they've got to cover rural and also areas like Aloha, and so it's not a direct apples to apples comparison. But as it relates to like size, we are lower staffed than Albany or Corvallis, but they've also had the luxury of being able to add more officers through police fees and or a levy. Veronica, thank you. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate your support. It's just nice to hear that. Thank you. And anybody else, again, without the questions, I'm gonna try and continue to give you information that I think may help you. Many probably have already voted, and that's great, regardless of what you choose to vote for. That is great that you're out there making your vote count. And for those who are still asking questions or want a little bit more information, that's why we're doing this. What would it take to, what information do you need to make an informed decision? That's why I'm here, is to be able to try and answer those questions. Another question is, how has the virus affected suspects who normally would be taken to jail? So again, all of us around the community, businesses, government entities, have all had to make adjustments. And the Washington County Jail and the Sheriff's Department is no exception. They've had to look at who they house, how can they make sure that they keep not only the corrections staff safe, but those who are currently being held in the jail, how do we make sure they're safe? And so there were some pretty heavy restrictions as far as who they would take in the jail this last month. Mostly Measure 11, obviously domestic violence assaults, and some warrants. And so when we would get somebody who was arrested for, say, a felony theft, maybe we had them in possession of a stolen vehicle, or they just committed a theft against a person and or a business, we would have to release them on a citation. And I think we can all agree that that's not much of a deterrent. And so we have seen a few of our repeat offenders take advantage of that. And so I'm told that because the jail has done a great job, and we're seeing decreases, that the jail restrictions may be loosened a little bit in the near future. So we're standing by to see what that means. So one of the things that I talk about, and in the literature we talk about also by adding on 8 officers, is the ability, right now we are challenged to handle 2 priority calls at the same time, 2 emergencies, where it may take all of our resources, especially if we don't have the overlap of, for example, a day shift and a swing shift. There's a couple hour overlap, and so a priority, we could get everybody going. When a shift is by themselves, we could be challenged with only 3 or 4 officers. And so to be able to handle those emergencies is imperative. Those are life safety issues. And another recent example, if you saw the press releases last week, or maybe you heard the sirens, on Thursday, we actually had 3 in progress virtually at the same time. Now, fortunately, that was during a time when day shift was still working. They had about 5 minutes left of their shift, and swing shift was already in service. But we had a suicidal subject armed with a handgun or a weapon that we needed to contain in a large populated area with threats of suicide by cop, which again is trying to force our hand to resolve the situation. And at the same time, we had a theft in progress. Somebody taking a purse, an occupied car, somebody getting into the car and taking a purse. And then at the same time, in the same general area, we had a DUI crash that needed to be handled. So all of this was going on, which stretched our resources. We were able to also get assistance from our joining agencies. So you would see Sherwood, King City, Tualatin, Washington County. In fact, Washington County came and handled the DUI as we were resolving those other 2 events. And by having the resources, we were able to resolve all of the issues peacefully. We got the person who had fired off the weapon with nobody being injured, and being able to get them held accountable, but also hopefully to the resources they need because they were an individual in crisis. The theft, after some escape on one of them, running through our neighborhoods, we were able to apprehend both of them and again take them to jail and hold them accountable. But again, those are the types of resources that really tax us. And where you might see it is a trickle down, as we're all tied up, and that could take anywhere from a half hour to a couple hours because you still have to take them to jail, book them and all of that. All of those lesser priority calls are pending, and they're the ones. So if you had somebody commit a burglary in your house, but they're gone, so it's not a priority, you may have to wait anywhere from an hour to 4 hours. And so that's not the level of service that we want to consistently provide. One of the other questions that people say, or the misconception is, well, we see all these police cars, and so I assume that equates to that's how many officers are working out in the field. And I just would remind people that we're a 24/7 operation with 3 different shifts, and we have to have adequate amount of cars to staff those shifts. And so if they're sitting in our parking lot, those aren't occupied and they're not the ones out working the field. So please don't think that the number of police cars parked at headquarters equates to how many officers are working out in the field. So Eddie was asking, how has Tigard Police functions changed with COVID-19? Here in Hawaii Sheriff's Department, we have had to change our work day-to-day drastically, Thank you, Eddie. Yes, as I kind of alluded to earlier, we like most law enforcement have had to make some decisions on not only how to keep the community safe, but our officers, because as we've seen across the country, you can take out a whole fire department, a whole shift of patrol officers just by an exposure. And so we've obviously, the highly coveted personal protective equipment we've been able to get. So you'll see us with face masks, you'll see us with the proper gloves. The whole Tyvek suit has been hard to come by, but we do have a few of those. We have maintained our shift schedule right now. We were able to handle it. We haven't gone into emergency 12-hour shift. We're able to keep some normalcy for our officers in their routine. The other thing I think that you can't overlook is the stress that it puts on the first responder. And I say this, we're talking fire, doctors, and nurses also, is we're used to being in harm's way, and we understand when we sign up that happens. But where our concern is not for ourselves, but what we might be bringing home to our families. So ensuring that we have proper protocols to be able to clean our uniforms, disinfectant, all of that, so that we make sure we do not bring anything home to our family that we did not intend to. And it's not realistic without any symptoms to isolate ourselves from our families during this, however long, 8 weeks or 6 weeks that we've been in this. So that's the other thing for me, is to make sure the morale is there, to make sure that I understand that and provide them with the best equipment and the best protocols in place to make sure that they are as healthy as they can be for themselves and their family. So Raina asked, I heard that Tigard will not cooperate with ICE in making arrests. Is that true? I don't understand the difference, as illegal is illegal correct? And that requires a little bit more of an explanation. And I would also, I can't probably go into the full depth of it, so if you go to our City of Tigard Police Department website, there's a lot of information on what Oregon's sanctuary city laws are, what our policies are, but what we're talking about is we are not going to be an agent of ICE and enforce immigration laws as they stand. We are not going to, if we come across somebody who we perceive to be undocumented, we are not going to call ICE to come and take the person away. That's what all of Oregon is not doing under the laws that have been instituted here. Recently, ICE has gone to subpoenas to request information, public information requests. That's been served on Washington County Sheriff's Department in Hillsborough. And through legal counsel, they've chosen to release information when issued by a subpoena. If not, then like myself, if I was issued a subpoena to give information, specific information, then I would have to face a judge for a contempt of court. And at this point, one thing I've said, and you'll see on our website I've said it, if I was served a court order, I would have to comply just like anybody law-abiding. So yes, that is it in a nutshell. We are mandated by state law and also by our ordinances and our policies on what we can and cannot do. So Brenda wanted to know, what can the public do to help besides voting? Brenda, you know, thank you for that. Wow, you know, the problem is just getting the staffing, and for me it's working with the elected officials, with the city manager on if we do not get this additional funding, what does that look like? So for a community, if there's a degradation of service or it takes longer on some of these routine, I guess I would just ask for your patience and understanding. Stay informed, ask the questions, because everybody has a different level of threshold of what they want to see their policing service look like. But clearly I cannot understate the importance of the support, both verbally, just even when you see an officer saying thank you for your service, goes a long ways. And we also recognize that should this levy not pass, is not a reflection of whether or not we feel the community supports us or not. I understand that there are a lot of factors in place, both economic and just you know, what you think you can or cannot do. And it's not for me to judge anybody on that. So just continue to support us, continue to know that we're trying to give you the best level of service that we can. And I'm always looking to collaborate with people. So another question from our Bull Mountain neighborhood. Chief, how have you personally been impacted by COVID? Well, some may know that my family is in Washington, and which got hit a little bit faster and harder than Oregon. And so for me personally, it was not being able to see my family, to not go up on a weekend for many weeks at a time. And so I could really see what other people were feeling, is that isolation. Right at the time of the emergency declaration, I did go up and see my family, make sure they had everything that they needed, and to be taken care of, knowing that I would not come back for maybe many weeks. Other than that, for me personally, it really is what keeps me up at night is making sure that I have done everything that I can to make sure the men and women are safe not only our call responders, but our investigators, our support staff, because we're an essential function, and some things we can do telecommuting, but others we just need to be here. And again, as we continue to learn, we learn little different things on how to mitigate the exposure, and so that is probably has my full attention, is making sure that this department is safe. So Marcy wants to know, came across an accident yesterday and didn't see any of the officers wearing face masks. Are they required to wear it? We make sure that everybody has their face mask, and whether circumstances dictate that they can't either don it on or they don't feel like they can be heard, then we're asking them to keep that 6-foot social distancing, or I should call it physical distancing. And at this point, we highly encourage it. But again, more importantly, depending on the situation, is does the officer feel that they can effectively communicate? Is their message getting across? So it's not mandated everywhere, but it is highly encouraged. Veronica, thank you for your support. Thank you for the kind words. I appreciate it. And then for those who may have experienced it, or for those who have to call into 911 and deal with WACA dispatcher, don't be alarmed if all of a sudden you're being asked if anybody has COVID-like symptoms. Again, that is for us to best assess how we should approach the situation. So again, asking all of you, do you have anybody with a fever? Is anybody vulnerable, sick? Things of that nature, so that again, if we need to, we're going to talk to you maybe outside under some other sheltering. Now, if this is again in progress life safety, we're going in and again with the proper equipment and resolve the situation to make sure everybody's safe. Again, I appreciate those that are sending me these questions. It's very helpful to know what is on your mind so that I can best answer that. So a follow-up is, what is some of the things you say when educating people on keeping the 6-foot distance? And what is the fine for repeat offenders? Well, let me talk about the repeat offenders first. So when the governor made this order and talked about social distancing and what that looked like, both for individuals, households, and or businesses. Our role is, we're about the third tier. Washington County has set up an enforcement entity that takes in these calls. They will be the first branch to talk to businesses or community members and remind them of the governor's order. They'll do that 1-2 times. About the third call in, they're going to ask local law enforcement. So if we get those calls, again, our primary focus is to educate people, to let them know, remind them of the governor's order, that it's still in effect, and that you need to adhere to it, or you put everybody else at risk. There is fines. It is a misdemeanor should you violate that, and yet we have not had to actually cite anybody, unlike what New York has had to do in their very dense population. Again, it's just about education. As the weather is out there and it's nice and people want to enjoy the park or some other recreation, again, is just keeping these 6-foot physical distances. The assumption is if you're together, you've been a family, that you have been sheltering together, but that may be something that we ask you. And again, to be mindful of that. While we're talking about that, I would just remind everybody that the playgrounds, the skate parks, they're not open yet, and so they're not cleaned and maintained. And so if somebody takes down a barrier, which is just a tape around it, and decides it's okay for their kids to climb on, you don't know who has also been climbing on it, and those are not maintained right now by our parks department. So I would just encourage people to to not be adhere to the order and resist the temptation to have your kids climb on the playgrounds right now. So Lorraine asks, I have seen drive-through passes by the police in our cul-de-sac and really appreciate it. You're welcome, Lorraine. I just think that the presence has helped a bit in our drug house activities. Keep up the good work. Thank you. It's good to see because, again, a little bit of decreased calls for service right now, so we're trying to be highly visible. Just prior to the COVID, that wouldn't have been the case. With all the calls for service, it seemed like we were just being reactive, going from one call to the next, and not really in those areas that people like to see us, especially around the school grounds when kids are getting out of school or going to school. And so we know those are a high priority. Again, by increasing patrol staffs, hopefully as we do that community-oriented policing a little bit more and that we're in the neighborhoods more, one, that we can actually stop and have a conversation, or two, again, just really know who belongs and what your concerns are and those quality of life issues. Dev, thank you. It's nice to hear from you. Love you, kid. How has been your favorite thing? Oh, and Devin asks, what's been your favorite thing about being the chief? Okay. I have now completed 34 years of police services, and I have loved pretty much every part of this, and I have fulfilled every rank. What I like most about being the chief is setting a tone of what I think policing should be, the professionalism, the culture that we have created here, hopefully as it equates to the type of policing that you want, but being able to put my stamp, my signature on who I am and lead the men and women here in a way that I think is highly professional but connected. At the end of my tenure, I hope that is my legacy, is the type of policing that I've been able to create here. And this has been a wonderful department, very professional. I did not come in as a change agent to fix a broken system. These men and women have been very dedicated, and just by virtue of coming from a different agency, we've just been able to take us up a couple more notches. And I feel that they were thirsty for that, and we've had some great success in the first 3 years. Court, I'm thankful and supportive of the job police do. Thank you, Court. Tough job dealing with difficult situations. I, however, struggle with how the city spends our tax dollars. Going on, with a typical annual 3% property tax increase on existing properties and a growth in new property tax bases driven by the growth in new population over the years, what is preventing the police department from being able to increase police services funded by the property tax growth? What the new levy is asking for is for Tigard citizens to spend proportionally more of their money for police services. Wow. Okay, Court, that was one that I think a lot of people have been asking, and it really comes to there are only a few of the departments that are in the general fund that get from the property taxes. And I think the first part is we are second to the lowest in Washington County in property tax, and a portion of that is we get a small part of it for the city. Everybody else gets a piece of the pie prior to us. So I think it equated to, I think it was 17 cents on the dollar for just general fund. And so the last couple of years, the city has made some tough choices in all departments, to include the police department, on how to basically, I don't want to say right size isn't the right thing, but given the services and the growth in the services can't keep up, and it it just costs more on these services, and so I think we're down to where we've shrinked all the departments as much as we can without this being a total police city. In other words, I think there are people here who like to enjoy the amenities of the library, those who like the amenities of a recreation and the parks. And so it's just to keep up with it, there is not enough income. And to simply just shift all the money to the police department, you would be foregoing a lot of some of the other amenities that you live in Tigard and want to. And I think if in the flyers, I'll say it a little more succinctly than what I just tried to ramble on, and that is, again, police services are funded with general fund dollars, with property taxes making up 50% of that fund. And police services account for 54%. So we're a big portion of that general fund already. And library services, in perspective, are 21%, parks maintenance is 9%, and then you have general city services as a remainder. And again, as I said, we are one of the lowest property tax rates in Washington County. And since 1990, the effect of state property tax law is restricted property tax increases by 3%, as you so alluded to in your question, while city costs go up at a higher rate. And I think it's been projected by our finance director at about 3.5 to 4%. So you can see we can't keep up with it. Costs will double over the next 20 years. And I think that's why I think it's important to note, again, many cities in Oregon are having to solve this problem. And when they're asking for the community to pay a little bit more or allocate more, it is for public service, police and or fire, depending on the type of city that they have. Because we know that it's such an important service, and most people are willing, if they're going to have to do any type of increase, is under public safety. So that probably didn't clearly cut it for you, but that is what we're dealt with right now, is the cost to keep up with the services and the demand, the public demand we can't keep up with, and therefore we're having to go out and look for additional revenue. Irene, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Irene, thank you for your support. Connie, you are welcome. Thank you for all your support and the support of the PD. And I appreciate, she has stated she plans to continue supporting us. Thank you, Connie. It is appreciated. So Veronica wanted to know, are we seeing more speeders since less traffic? Absolutely. I think all of you might attest to that. We all are enjoying the ability, for those of us who still have to come into work, like myself and my commute, I see the freedom of being able to just flow and not be gridlocked. We see that in Tigard, especially along 99. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is people are taking that to the extreme, where they're not only going the speed limit finally, but we're seeing people are going over the speed limit. Again, oftentimes we take a look and monitor 217 and I-5. And the other day, if you saw one of our media posts, one of our officers did have a radar clock of 127 miles per hour on 217 and I-5. And we had somebody else conversely go about 91 miles per hour. So yes, we are seeing that. We're also seeing individuals who are electing not to stop. And we're challenged with trying to safely stay with them to stop. And oftentimes we've had to terminate our attempts just for overall public safety. And again, this is a great time to remind everybody, because I believe we're going to have some great sunshine this weekend. While people are being asked to stay home, but now they want to get out in the sunshine. So for those of you who are driving, please be cognizant of a lot of pedestrian, a lot of runners, bicyclists, families with strollers. Make sure you stop before you get to the crosswalk. Make sure you look both ways. Don't assume anything, because you're going to see a lot more activity out there, and we would just hate to see somebody get injured from that. So I'm looking just to see if there's any other questions that are coming in. We are about 15 minutes left. So again, if you have any questions, please send them through the chat line, and do my best to answer them. So another question is, you're seeing a lot of people not social distancing at the park. What are the police doing about this? Kind of goes back to that overall enforcement philosophy. We have tried, when we see it happening, first of all, it's a complaint driven. If people have concerns of what they see, they call it in, and we get dispatched to it. It's going to be, first of all, one of our lower priority calls. But if we can get to it, we're there just to educate. That is our primary focus, is to remind people why we have these physical distancing requirements, and to please ask people to do their part until the governor lifts this order. So again, the police department is here just to educate and remind people to do their part. Going back again to our pandemic times, it seems as though officers are not going out to certain calls during COVID and just taking a report over the phone. When do they not go to a call, and when do they still respond in person? So again, we evaluate each call. If it is a cold call, something that has already happened, and it's just a matter of you want to make a police report, we're going to try and see if we can handle that over the phone. If people insist on us coming, we're going to come, and again, it's going to be with hopefully all of our PPE, our personal protective equipment on. For those that we have to go out, again, dispatch or the officers are going to call, get some more information, just again make sure that we can ascertain how safe it is and how we need to conduct our response. So again, thank you for those who have been patient with us, who have been willing to have their report taken over the phone. That has helped us tremendously to minimize that person-to-person, face-to-face contact when it isn't totally necessary. But those who are really concerned, maybe feel they're not safe in their area or their neighborhood, we'll come out. We'll be there and we'll have a conversation with you. Sarah, thank you for your support. Appreciate the positive comments. Tara, thank you also. I hope Tacoma is doing well. I miss all of you as well. Thank you for that. And Chris, could you speak to some on the park's reopening? So right now, again, what the city is doing, the county is doing, is we're all looking for the governor's direction. And the governor has outlined 7 points before she can get to phase 1. I think there's 3 phases to her plan. And so we've looked at that closely and said, what does that look like for Tigard? And so right now, excuse me, right now all the directors are looking at the type of services they're providing under this COVID time, and what does it look like to reopen or start integrating some of these steps. And so the Parks Department is looking at that as well. And it'll be, I think the first phase for the governor would allow 10 people. And then again, the next phase is 25, and then the third phase is 50. So somewhere in the parks is, what does it mean when you open that up, and how difficult is that to control? It's very difficult. So we're not going to try and put people at risk. So you can still run in the paths and participate in smaller picnics, but as far as the barbecue areas where you can kind of host an event or have your sporting practices and the playgrounds, I think we're still a ways off. But we are going to be looking to what the state is doing and what the governor's order in alignment of that. But we should have a phase 1 plan that's in development come out within the next week or 2. So John wanted to know, is the new photo red light generating funding for the police department? John, it is quiet out there, and along 99 where those cameras are at, and so it's not generating a lot of violations, and so but any fun, and then the other part of this, the courts aren't open yet, so those who do receive violations have been put off and given a longer time. So you're not seeing the funds right now come in. When they do come in, they'll go into the general fund, and that'll be part of that overall revenue, so the city can make determination of where the allocation comes from, or how it's getting dispersed. Should, once the revenues kind of pay for the system itself and the employees that have to monitor that, then the talk is of having that some of those revenues go towards a police facility, which we are as desperate need of that as we are of officers. So, but it will all come into the general fund, into a bucket, and not specifically allocated directly to the police department. Rochelle wanted to know, do you know who I would contact to get a dead end sign put on Copper Creek Drive? I've had so many people speeding past my house where my kids play because they think the cul-de-sac goes through to Durham. Okay. Well, with my trusty support, I'm going to get you so that I don't give you the runaround. So it says here, for the request of a dead end sign submitted to the traffic safety concern. That's an online thing you can do, and it'll either go to the traffic unit or it goes to the engineers. And in this case, signage belongs to the engineers. And there's code and all different reasons whether or not that meets it. So you can do it online from the comfort of your home, and it'll be distributed to like I said, the traffic unit or the engineers, and they can tell you. They may send somebody out to assess what you're asking for. So hopefully you find that helpful. And again, it is our Traffic Safety Concerns app, which is on our website. Irene wanted to know, have you made plans of and how reopening will work with council and state rules? How many businesses have closed down? We evaluate this weekly as to how can we, I don't know if you want to say getting back to normal looks, but when we can start meeting in public spaces, which would be then the council. So right now it's all virtual, following state rules, to make sure that people can have their public comments heard. We've been working through that. So I don't foresee this anytime that we're in, I think the governor calls this phase 0, maybe not even in phase 1. So I think we're still maybe a month out, if not longer, on getting back to normal council sessions. The businesses have closed down. I couldn't even begin to guess or project. We have 3,300 businesses in the city of Tigard, if you did not know that. I just learned last night, and about 2,400 of them have 10 or less employees. So I can only imagine the impact and strain that they're under, and whether or not they've had to make that decision yet, whether to close down or if they were still able to ride this out. So I think that is yet to be seen, and I just, our thoughts and prayers are with those business owners who I imagine are under a tremendous amount of stress, not only for themselves and their families, but also for the employees that they may have had to lay off as well. Larry has said thank you and gives our support to the police department. Larry, thank you. Thank you for your service. We appreciate it. And Gary, thank you. He has complimented us on this session. I appreciate all of you guys' patience. This is not my day job, so thank you for bearing with me on this. The earlier submitted question. Okay, I'm trying to see your question. How can citizens support the PD via situational awareness? And if you see anything, say something. And then his appreciation. So if I think I understand your question, Gary, on, so definitely if you see something, say something. Again, depending on what it is concerning, that's how Tigard residents, Tigard citizens are great at this, is they call in when there's concern. You don't know what the situation is, whether somebody's in crisis, needs some assistance, something just doesn't look right. Call us. We will do these welfare checks. We will make sure that people are okay, or if they need any resources. So as far as the social distancing violations, again, we just ask for your patience. We'll go out, we'll educate, but it really falls down to we just need people to adhere to the governor's order and to be good stewards of that, and basically self-discipline is what I would ask. And anytime, and then the other thing, Gary and everybody else out there, is going back to commercial burglaries. So if you're out and about, whether you're walking, running, I would just ask that you maybe not take the same route, but take a different way and keep an eye on these businesses that are closed. I'm sure the owners would appreciate it. More eyes and ears on something that, for example, when we're patrolling at night and all of a sudden we see a ladder leaning up against a business, we get out, we start looking around. At that time, in that particular situation, it was the owner who was working after hours, but we want to check on those properties. So being additional eyes and ears for us is greatly appreciated. And Evelyn is saying hello to all the officers. Thank you. Appreciate that. And again, I think we're winding down to this hour session. I, again, appreciate everybody who has sent in questions. I hope you found it informative. I cannot wait till I can actually go back to business as normal and actually meet all of you face to face, answer your questions. Again, thank you for supporting the police department. Thank you for asking the questions so that you can be more informed. Oh, one more question we got. Oh, yes, this is Jeremy, thank you. Traffic light cameras flash when no one is going through the intersection. Is this by design or is it a malfunction? Jeremy, I can tell you how many people have called in asking about that. And it's a couple of things that could go on. First, you could go through it and be clearly right, but somebody didn't yield and stop on a red light and actually activate the flash. So do not automatically assume that a flash goes on that you are going to get a citation. There are 2 levels of review before it even gets to that point. The vendor will look at all things that activated a flash, and if it doesn't meet any of our criteria, then it goes nowhere. If it looks like a violation, then it will be sent to the police department, and only a sworn officer can review those and say, yes, in fact, that was a violation, and then issue a citation. And to give you an example, as we're still adjusting, and there have been more flashes that are not violation than there are violations. And so we're trying to minimize the number of flashes that occur that are not violations, but that is still working with the vendor. So for everybody, if you see a flash, that does not mean that you are going to get a citation. There's a whole level of reviews before anybody has to bother you. But always ask, and we'll be happy to answer those questions. So great question. And we have time for one more question. Derek asks, this is a little off topic, but what is your favorite thing about Tigard? I'll share one personal thing. I live in Puyallup. That is where my home is. And it's a little bit smaller than Tigard. I like the smaller town feel. So obviously policing and being here I like the fact that while it's not everybody knows your name, you do get to know the people that you work for, live around. Of course, I embrace the fact that everybody is supportive. But Tigard has a great vibe. It's growing. It's adds a little bit of diversity for everybody, and I would say that it's a very, very welcoming community, and that is my favorite part of Tigard. So thank you for asking, Derek. And again, I will do more virtual if we are still sheltering in place. Keep the comments coming. We have a great staff that answer your questions on all of our social media platforms. We try and be responsive. I'm always looking for suggestions and feedback, so please send them our way on how you think I can make this better, more relevant. I'm happy to do so. And again, thank you for your support. Be safe, be healthy, and until next time, goodbye.